John D. Rockefeller was not simply a businessman. He was a force that redefined the very meaning of wealth and power in America. Born in 1839 in Richford, New York, he grew up in a modest household, the son of a traveling salesman and a devout mother. His childhood was shaped by thrift, strict discipline, and the unshakable belief that hard work and faith could carve out a destiny beyond imagination. For many, Rockefeller represents the dream of rags to riches, but his story is also one of controversy, monopoly, and the sharp edge of capitalism. By the time he entered his teenage years, Rockefeller had already displayed a natural talent for numbers. He kept meticulous records, managed small deals, and began lending money with interest to neighbors, foreshadowing the financial empire he would one day build. Unlike other children who dreamed in vague terms, Rockefeller was deliberate and precise. His ambition was grounded in arithmetic, routine, and discipline. The young Rockefeller's first job was as an assistant bookkeeper at just 16 years old. He earned a modest wage, but he treated every cent as sacred, saving and investing whenever possible. This attitude toward money would never change. Where others saw cash as fuel for indulgence, Rockefeller saw it as a seed that could multiply if planted wisely. His devotion to thrift became a lifelong habit, making him a paradox, the richest man of his time, yet frugal in his personal spending. In the mid-19th century, America was a nation bursting with opportunity. Railroads stretched across the continent, cities expanded rapidly, and new industries were taking shape. Amid this explosion of progress, one substance would define Rockefeller's life: oil. At the time, crude oil was a messy, smelly, and often useless substance. But with the invention of kerosene lamps, oil transformed into liquid gold. And Rockefeller saw not just oil's potential, but the possibility of controlling its flow. Rockefeller entered the oil industry in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1860s. He founded a small refinery with partners, but unlike others who rushed in for quick profits, Rockefeller thought long-term. He reinvested earnings, modernized equipment, and cut waste relentlessly. To him, efficiency wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. Every drop of oil mattered, and every fraction of a cent saved meant victory over competitors. What made Rockefeller extraordinary was not only his focus, but his relentless ability to outmaneuver rivals. He understood railroads, suppliers, and buyers better than anyone. He negotiated secret rebates from railroads, allowing him to ship oil at lower costs than his competitors. This advantage multiplied rapidly, crushing rivals who could not match his prices. By combining ruthless strategy with relentless efficiency, Rockefeller began building the foundations of Standard Oil. Standard Oil, founded in 1870, would soon dominate the American oil industry like no company before it. Rockefeller's empire controlled every stage of production, from drilling to refining, from shipping to sales. He envisioned not just being part of the industry, but owning it. Competitors who refused to sell to him were outcompeted, undersold, and eventually absorbed. Critics called it ruthless. Rockefeller called it progress. By the late 1870s, Standard Oil refined over 90% of America's oil. Such dominance was unheard of in American business, and it sparked admiration and outrage in equal measure. To supporters, Rockefeller was a genius who brought order to a chaotic industry. To critics, he was a monopolist strangling free competition. Either way, his name became synonymous with power. While his business methods were aggressive, Rockefeller was also deeply religious. A devout Baptist, he believed that his fortune was entrusted to him by God for a purpose. He attended church regularly, donated to missions, and often framed his business victories as part of a divine plan. To outsiders, this mix of piety and ruthlessness seemed contradictory, but to Rockefeller, it was entirely consistent. He lived modestly compared to his wealth. While millionaires flaunted their riches with grand parties and excess, Rockefeller kept his life disciplined. He avoided alcohol, lived by a strict routine, and even after becoming the world's first billionaire, counted his pennies. His greatest indulgence was philanthropy, where he would later give away hundreds of millions of dollars to education, medicine, and science. Still, his rise did not come without enemies. Journalists like Ida Tarbell, whose father had been crushed by Standard Oil's tactics, exposed the company's monopolistic practices in scathing detail. Her groundbreaking work, The History of the Standard Oil Company, portrayed Rockefeller as a predatory robber baron who manipulated markets and destroyed livelihoods. This book ignited public anger and helped fuel the progressive movement's call for reform. The government eventually responded. In 1911, after years of legal battles, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and ordered its breakup. Overnight, the mighty empire Rockefeller had built was dismantled into 34 smaller companies. But in a twist of fate, this breakup made Rockefeller even richer. The smaller companies flourished, and Rockefeller's shares in each skyrocketed in value. By then, Rockefeller was already stepping away from daily business. His focus had shifted toward philanthropy on a scale never before seen in history. He founded the Rockefeller Foundation, which transformed medicine, science, and education across the globe. From funding the eradication of hookworm to establishing the University of Chicago, his donations reshaped entire fields. Rockefeller's vision of wealth was clear. Money was not an end, but a means to build institutions that would last beyond his lifetime. In this, he mirrored a uniquely American paradox. The man who was accused of ruthless greed in business became one of the greatest philanthropists in history. His story illustrates the thin line between ambition and exploitation, between private power and public good. Even in old age, Rockefeller remained disciplined. He rose early, followed a strict routine, and lived with the same frugality he had as a boy. He once famously said, "I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity." For him, success was not just about money, but about resilience, patience, and strategy. By the time of his death in 1937, Rockefeller had not only transformed American business, but also reshaped global philanthropy. His legacy lives on, not only in corporations like ExxonMobil and Chevron, descendants of Standard Oil, but in universities, hospitals, and research institutions funded by his fortune. Rockefeller was more than a billionaire. He was a symbol of the Gilded Age, a figure who embodied both the promise and perils of capitalism. His life invites admiration, criticism, and reflection on how wealth can be built, wielded, and ultimately given away.
The Gilded Age was the era in which Rockefeller thrived, and it was a time defined by excess, ambition, and industrial might. America was transforming from a rural society into an urban industrial powerhouse. Railroads connected coasts, steel built skyscrapers, and fortunes were made almost overnight. Rockefeller stood at the very center of this transformation, shaping the oil industry into a disciplined, organized machine. Unlike many of his rivals, Rockefeller did not gamble with speculation. His rise was not built on chance, but on calculation. Every deal was carefully measured, every investment studied. He treated business like a science, with efficiency and predictability as the core principles. This analytical approach helped him outlast reckless competitors who chased quick profits. Rockefeller's reputation for secrecy also added to his mystique. Rarely granting interviews and keeping a tight circle of confidants, he allowed rumors to spread unchecked. To the public, he became an almost shadowy figure, a man pulling invisible strings behind America's booming oil economy. This air of mystery only heightened both admiration and suspicion. His workforce, meanwhile, experienced the full weight of his obsession with efficiency. Rockefeller demanded precision and loyalty from his employees. In return, he offered stability and long-term employment in an age when many workers faced uncertainty. For some, he was a benefactor. For others, a tyrant who prioritized profits over people. One of Rockefeller's greatest strengths was vertical integration. By owning every stage of production, he ensured that Standard Oil controlled not just oil itself, but the means of refining, transporting, and distributing it. This strategy, revolutionary at the time, became the model for modern corporations. It also made competitors nearly powerless, as they could not match his scale or efficiency. Public opinion of Rockefeller was sharply divided. For every admirer who saw him as a brilliant captain of industry, there were critics who painted him as the embodiment of greed. Political cartoons of the time often depicted Standard Oil as an octopus, its tentacles wrapped around Congress, railroads, and the courts. The image was powerful. It suggested that Rockefeller's reach extended into every corner of American life. Despite the negative press, Rockefeller himself remained largely unmoved. He once remarked, "I can think of nothing less pleasurable than a life devoted to pleasure." His focus was always on work, on building systems that could endure. If public opinion turned against him, it was, in his view, a small price to pay for the efficiency and stability he brought to the industry. The sheer scale of Standard Oil's empire cannot be overstated. At its height, the company managed pipelines stretching thousands of miles, refineries in multiple states, fleets of tank cars, and sales networks across the globe. Rockefeller had turned oil into a commodity as stable and essential as steel or coal. More importantly, he had shown that corporate power could rival even government authority. For politicians and reformers, this was alarming. The fear was not just about oil, but about the concentration of wealth and power in private hands. Rockefeller became the poster child for the trust-busting movement, which demanded that monopolies be dismantled to protect free enterprise. Though he rarely entered politics himself, his business empire forced Washington to act. Yet amid these controversies, Rockefeller's philanthropic endeavors were growing. He began with small donations to his church and local charities, but soon expanded to grander ambitions. Education was one of his greatest passions. He endowed universities, funded scholarships, and believed that knowledge was the key to uplifting society. The University of Chicago, which he helped establish, became one of the world's leading institutions. Medical science also benefited enormously from his fortune. At a time when diseases like hookworm and yellow fever devastated communities, Rockefeller poured millions into research and public health campaigns. The Rockefeller Foundation pioneered efforts in global health, reshaping the way modern medicine tackled epidemics. Entire generations would live longer, healthier lives because of his philanthropy. For Rockefeller, philanthropy was not charity, it was investment. He applied the same discipline to giving money as he had to making it. He insisted on results, efficiency, and long-term impact. He once said, "The best philanthropy is constantly in search of the finalities, a search for a cause, an attempt to cure evils at their source." Still, the tension between Rockefeller the philanthropist and Rockefeller the monopolist never faded. To his critics, giving away money did not erase the ruthless tactics he used to build Standard Oil. To his supporters, his philanthropy proved that even the harshest business methods could be redeemed through generosity. This duality has defined his legacy ever since. In his personal life, Rockefeller valued family deeply. He married Laura Spelman in 1864, and together they raised 5 children. Their marriage was built on shared faith, discipline, and commitment to education. Laura, known for her strong character, played a significant role in shaping Rockefeller's philanthropic interests, especially in supporting women's education. Despite his fortune, Rockefeller was a man of routine. He famously went to bed early, ate simply, and walked regularly for exercise. Gardening became one of his favorite pastimes, and he often said that it brought him peace. His love of golf in later years was another reflection of his simple pleasures, showing a contrast to the complexity of his business empire. The contrast between his private simplicity and public power fascinated journalists. To them, he was a paradox, one of the richest men alive, living a modest lifestyle, while controlling an empire larger than most nations' economies. This paradox only deepened his legend. Rockefeller also lived long enough to witness the transformation of the very industry he created. As automobiles replaced kerosene lamps, gasoline became the new gold of the oil age. The companies born from Standard Oil's breakup thrived in this new era, ensuring that Rockefeller's influence continued long after his official retirement. When asked about the secret of his success, Rockefeller often emphasized patience and persistence. He believed in steady progress, in building brick by brick, rather than chasing quick gains. To him, greatness was not found in sudden bursts of genius, but in discipline over decades. By the early 20th century, Rockefeller had become not just a man, but a myth. He represented both the promise of capitalism and its dangers. His story raised questions that remain relevant today. How much power should one individual or corporation have? And how should wealth be used, hoarded for personal gain, or invested back into society? As he entered his later years, Rockefeller increasingly embraced his role as elder statesman of philanthropy. He spent less time discussing oil and more time discussing education, medicine, and the future of humanity. His vision for wealth as a tool of social progress became the defining theme of his final decades.
As Rockefeller's philanthropy expanded, it began reshaping not only America, but the entire world. His funding of medical research in the early 20th century led to breakthroughs in understanding diseases that plagued millions. The Rockefeller Foundation's campaigns against hookworm in the American South dramatically reduced infection rates, transforming public health in impoverished communities. In some ways, his philanthropy touched more lives than his oil empire ever did. Education, too, bore his signature. The University of Chicago quickly rose into the ranks of elite institutions, producing Nobel Prize winners in groundbreaking research. Rockefeller's investments in education also extended to historically black colleges and women's institutions, reflecting his belief in expanding access to knowledge. His insistence on rigorous standards ensured that his contributions created lasting institutions rather than short-lived charities. Still, the shadows of Standard Oil lingered. Even after the company was dismantled in 1911 by the U.S. Supreme Court, its offspring, Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, and others, became some of the most powerful corporations of the 20th century. Ironically, the breakup only made Rockefeller richer, as he retained shares in each of the successor companies, which skyrocketed in value. This financial windfall made him the world's first billionaire by 1916. At a time when the average American earned less than $1,000 a year, Rockefeller's wealth seemed almost incomprehensible. Newspapers marveled at his fortune, while critics demanded greater taxation on the super-rich. To many, Rockefeller embodied both the triumph and inequality of capitalism. Despite the criticisms, Rockefeller insisted that wealth was a responsibility, not merely a privilege. He believed that those who amassed fortunes had a duty to use them for the betterment of society. This philosophy influenced later philanthropists such as Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, and in the modern era, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. In his later years, Rockefeller became somewhat of a cultural icon. Children in Cleveland once lined up outside his home to receive shiny dimes from him, a quirky ritual that became legendary. For Rockefeller, it was not merely a gift, but a lesson. He wanted to teach thrift, savings, and the power of investing even the smallest sums. His health, which had once been fragile, improved dramatically as he aged. By adopting a strict routine, avoiding stress, and practicing moderation, he lived well into his 90s, an extraordinary lifespan for his era. This longevity allowed him to see his philanthropic legacy take shape across multiple generations. Rockefeller's critics, however, never fully softened. Journalists like Ida Tarbell, whose exposé on Standard Oil remains one of the most famous works of investigative reporting, ensured that his reputation as a monopolist endured. Tarbell's work not only cemented Rockefeller's public image as ruthless, but also influenced future regulatory policies in America. Yet even Tarbell's scathing portrait could not erase the fact that Rockefeller's model of efficiency had reshaped American industry. Whether in oil, steel, or railroads, other magnates copied his methods of consolidation, integration, and cost control. In this sense, he became the blueprint for the modern CEO, even as debates about ethics continued. Rockefeller's faith also remained central to his life. A devout Baptist, he believed that his fortune was part of God's plan, and that his duty was to use it wisely. His church-going habits, moral discipline, and philanthropic vision were intertwined, making his wealth appear to him not as personal property, but as a trust to be administered. In the public imagination, Rockefeller was often compared to royalty. His control over vast resources and his ability to influence national policy made him seem like an American king without a crown. Unlike monarchs, however, his power was self-made, a product of business genius rather than inheritance. The global reach of Rockefeller's wealth also became evident. His foundation funded scientific expeditions, agricultural improvements, and public health campaigns across continents. From fighting malaria in Latin America to supporting medical schools in Asia, Rockefeller's influence was felt in places he never personally visited. This global vision set him apart from many of his contemporaries. While other magnates largely focused on America, Rockefeller saw his fortune as a tool for global uplift. In many ways, he anticipated the interconnected world of the 21st century, where philanthropy, science, and business cross international borders. Yet Rockefeller himself remained, at heart, a reserved man. Despite his immense wealth, he disliked ostentation and avoided lavish displays of luxury. Unlike some of his peers who built palatial mansions and threw extravagant parties, Rockefeller's lifestyle remained remarkably restrained. His modesty in private life stood in sharp contrast to the grandeur of his public influence. The paradox of Rockefeller, the ruthless businessman and the generous philanthropist, continued to shape his legacy. Was he a robber baron or a benefactor? Was he motivated by greed or by a vision of progress? Historians still debate these questions, but the truth likely lies in the complexity of both. Rockefeller's methods also transformed American law. The antitrust rulings that broke up Standard Oil laid the foundation for future government oversight of corporations. In this sense, Rockefeller's empire forced America to redefine the relationship between business and government. He shaped not only the oil industry, but the very rules of capitalism. Even as the oil industry evolved, Rockefeller's principles endured. The emphasis on efficiency, integration, and cost reduction became hallmarks of corporate strategy worldwide. His empire may have dissolved, but his methods became permanent fixtures in the business playbook. For ordinary Americans, however, Rockefeller was less a strategist, more a symbol. To some, he represented the American dream, proof that a poor boy from Cleveland could rise to unimaginable heights. To others, he embodied inequality and the dangers of unchecked capitalism. This dual perception remains central to his story. By the time he reached his twilight years, Rockefeller had become something rare in American life, a living legend. Children, businessmen, politicians, and even foreign leaders spoke his name with awe. His presence at events, his simple habits, and his immense generosity kept him in the public eye long after his business days were over.
As the 20th century unfolded, Rockefeller witnessed the rise of an America that his fortune had helped build. Skyscrapers dotted city skylines, railroads spanned the nation, and oil-powered cars, ships, and industry. Even though he had retired from active business, the foundation of modern America still carried his fingerprints. In many ways, his life became a study in contrasts. The young Rockefeller had been calculating, austere, and even feared. The elderly Rockefeller was seen as almost grandfatherly, giving dimes to children and funding medical cures. This transformation fascinated the public, as it showed a softer, more human side of the once dreaded tycoon. The Great Depression brought new scrutiny to America's wealthy elite. While millions of Americans struggled in breadlines, the fortunes of Rockefeller's heirs remained vast. Critics questioned whether such concentrated wealth should exist, while defenders pointed to the hospitals, universities, and research institutes that bore his name. Yet Rockefeller's philanthropic structures provided stability even during hard times. The Rockefeller Foundation funded agricultural research that improved crop yields, helping to feed millions. It also supported pioneering work in public health, advancing vaccines and treatments that saved countless lives. By the 1930s, Rockefeller's fortune had become not just personal wealth, but an institution. Managed carefully, it continued to grow even as markets collapsed. His foundations ensured that the flow of money into education, science, and public health never ceased, even in times of crisis. Rockefeller's personal life, however, remained private. He spent much of his later years at his estate in Pocantico Hills, New York, surrounded by family. Despite his immense fame, he cherished moments of simplicity, walking in gardens, reading quietly, and attending Sunday services. Visitors often remarked on his surprising humility. Unlike many wealthy figures who sought constant attention, Rockefeller seemed content to let his foundations and institutions speak for him. His belief in stewardship meant that the wealth he controlled was not for personal indulgence, but for generational impact. As automobiles became widespread, Rockefeller's oil legacy became even more central to American life. The very cars that filled highways were fueled by gasoline, derived from the industry he had pioneered. Even though Standard Oil had been broken up, its descendants supplied the lifeblood of modern transportation. Rockefeller's longevity allowed him to outlive most of his business rivals. While names like Carnegie and Morgan became part of history, Rockefeller remained a living presence, still appearing in newsreels and newspapers into the 1930s. For the public, he was both a relic of the Gilded Age and a figure of enduring relevance. The symbolism of his wealth continued to shape debates about capitalism. Some politicians argued that his fortune represented dangerous inequality, while others claimed it was proof of America's boundless opportunity. The debate over wealth concentration, still alive today, was often framed through the story of John D. Rockefeller.
His commitment to secrecy and control never fully faded. Rockefeller kept meticulous records of his finances and insisted on discipline in his foundations. Nothing was wasted. Every dollar had a purpose. His obsession with order made him an unusually effective philanthropist, ensuring that his donations created permanent institutions rather than fleeting gestures. His philanthropy's global reach only expanded. The Rockefeller Foundation supported agricultural revolutions in Mexico and Asia, laying the groundwork for the later Green Revolution that fed billions. His fortune, once built on oil, was now feeding the world in an entirely new way. Historians often note that Rockefeller's philanthropy was not simply generosity, it was strategy. He believed in solving root problems rather than treating symptoms. Instead of handing out bread, he funded agricultural science. Instead of temporary aid, he created universities. His goal was to make society stronger, not just to relieve immediate suffering. Still, critics saw hypocrisy. They argued that the same ruthless ambition that built Standard Oil could not be redeemed by philanthropy. To them, Rockefeller's fortune was tainted, no matter how many schools or hospitals he built. These debates continue to this day, with Rockefeller serving as a case study in the ethics of wealth. Rockefeller himself, however, appeared unbothered. He often quoted scripture and emphasized his belief that he was fulfilling God's will. In his mind, both his business success and his philanthropy were part of a divine plan. His calmness in the face of criticism reflected the same discipline that had driven his business empire. The Rockefeller family also began to play a more visible role in public life. Their descendants entered politics, finance, and philanthropy, carrying his legacy into new arenas. Nelson Rockefeller, for example, became governor of New York and later vice president of the United States, proving that the family's influence was far from over. This transition from one man's fortune to a family dynasty mirrored the broader evolution of America's elite. What had begun as the personal drive of a single entrepreneur became an enduring family institution, shaping policy, culture, and philanthropy across generations. As the world entered an age of world wars, Rockefeller's influence extended even further. Oil became the decisive fuel of modern warfare, and the companies descended from Standard Oil supplied armies, navies, and air forces. Without his legacy, the 20th century's wars would have looked very different. Even as the instruments of war grew more destructive, Rockefeller's foundations focused on peace. They funded research into international cooperation, education exchanges, and public health efforts in war-torn regions. The paradox of his legacy, fueling both war machines and humanitarian relief, remained striking. By the end of his long life, Rockefeller had become something of a myth. Was he the ultimate capitalist, the ultimate philanthropist, or both at once? To Americans, he embodied the contradictions of wealth, power, and morality, leaving behind a story that continues to fascinate and divide.